Ask the Podcast Coach for July 8th, 2017.
Let's get ready to podcast.
Oh, there it is. It's that fun-filled music. That means it's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. We are here every Saturday at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from the AverageGuy.tv. How's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Always good to be back on Ask the Podcast Coach. And in the middle of summer, always nice to be in an air-conditioned space.
Oh, absolutely. Holy cow. It's I'm not a fan of the sun. It does, I don't know if you can still, I had a thing going on here on my eyebrow. I have sun poisoning. So
what? What does that mean?
Sun poisoning is a weird thing. Let's start off with a tangent. When I was in my late 20s, I went to a water park, covered myself in, that stuff.
Sunscreen.
Elmer's glue. It washed off, and I always burn and peel. That was kind of like a running gag. And I would get like red as a lobster. And this was a whole new kind of red as a lobster kind of thing. I was
really bad.
My face hurt. I could not smile. And I got home and I said, that's it. I'm jumping in the tub. So I got in the tub with cool water. Worst thing you can do, by the way.
Really?
Because then when you stand up, it feels like somebody's just taking a flamethrower to you.
Ooh.
And so at the time, there I am naked in the tub. And I'm like, I can't get out of the tub. And so my girlfriend at the time was like, I have some Noxzema. Would that help, you think? So she kind of rolls in the Noxzema. And as I'm getting out of the water, I just covered myself in Noxzema. And so I've always heard that if you get sunburned enough, you will vomit. And I've never heard of this. I thought it was an old wives' tale. I'm here to tell you it's true.
Yikes.
And we called the nurse because I was like it was like askanurse.com. And I called them and she said, so you're doing this. And I said, yeah. And I said, I'm freezing to death and I'm under a comforter. And you could bake bread under this blanket. And she said, oh, you have sun poisoning. She goes, you probably have like, what is it? Is it first degree is like the worst burn? You can have like third degree burns. And she said,
yeah.
She says, yeah, you probably have sun poisoning. And she goes, probably from this point forward, you'll be very sensitive to the sun. And I was like, really? And it's true. If I go out in the sun for like a half hour and it's really, really hot, I get a little dot on my wrist or someplace that itches. So it's kind of, so if you ever wonder why I always look like a vampire, it's because the sun and I are no longer friends.
Well, good thing that's true, because podcasting not required to be done in the sun.
Exactly. So way to bring it back to podcasting.
That's what we do here.
The big news this week, and it's not that we hate SoundCloud.
I think you do. I think you do, Dave. I think secretly you wish ill upon them every week. You do.
I've always thought it was a bad idea.
Yeah. And
it's becoming more and more. We've heard it's kind of funny how they, little things will trickle out where it's, one of the main guys like left earlier in the year, and they keep losing millions of dollars, which is always kind of interesting. And the latest news is they've laid off 40% of their staff, which to me, I mean, call me crazy. That's a pretty big sign that things are not going well in the SoundCloud camp. And this is courtesy of Music Business Worldwide. And they said the German-born streaming company informed its staff today that 173 jobs are being cut from a total headcount of 420. So holy shnikes. And they said basically, I want to say it's their New York. There are 2 offices that are being closed. It said recent rumors have suggested that Deezer, majority owned by Len Blavatnik's Access Industries, could acquire SoundCloud, which is interesting because they're the people that acquired Stitcher and then did almost nothing with it. So I was like, well, that's interesting. Yeah, here it is. They're going to, the business will consolidate its operations across its New York and Berlin offices. So I'm assuming if you worked in like, I don't know, San Francisco, guess what? You better.
You're done. Yeah. You're done.
So it's just one of those things where if you're using SoundCloud as your primary, like they're my feed, they're everything, yada, yada, yada. I'd start coming up with a plan B, because it really is starting to look pretty, grim over there. I don't think this is one of those, like, this is not a test. This is not a drill.
Yeah, this is not a drill. Yeah. The warning lights are flashing. The check engine light has come on. I'm a little less negative on SoundCloud. I think there's some very good purposes for them. Never recommend you put your podcast there. So if you are hosting there, it's probably time to start looking at summer. Dave, the problem is and we talked a little bit about this in the Slack group this week. We create these podcasting bubbles, right? And our bubble that's around us, the folks that listen, they all know that. Yeah. Like, I don't think there's anybody new. I don't think this morning anybody listening to this live or anybody listening to the recording, it's like, oh my God, now is the time. We have warned them sufficiently, right? So the problem is you've got tons of musicians out there who aren't listening to podcasts. And so there's still going to be a huge group that are surprised when this thing goes under or they decide to close up. What happened? And so that's kind of the problem. Is I don't think it's necessarily reaching out into the other bubbles.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see, because I had a client this week was asking about, what do I do if he's an audio editor and he wants to basically be a producer for shows. He goes, what do I do if I have multiple shows? Do I put them under my iTunes account? I'm like, that's a really bad idea. I said, because you kind of then own the podcast. I said, when people are going to want to start checking their stats in Podcast Connect later, they're going to have to go through you. And I said, now, depending on your philosophy, if you do it for them, well, then they have to go through you, and that's a good thing. I said, but I always like my clients to have complete control. And he goes, well, how does Gimlet do it? So I went over and looked at, Gimlet just did a new show for eBay. And sure enough, number one, they're using FeedBurner and SoundCloud. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And the email associated with the eBay account is a Gimlet email. So I'll be interested.
They probably partnered directly.
Yeah, I'm going to say there's got to be a contract in there somewhere that says, if we want to leave you guys, but that's the thing. You can't right now, as of July 2017, you cannot transfer ownership of like if I'm in, like I have some from years ago. I have some clients that I submitted their show to iTunes for them. I can't say, take this show, the ABC show, and give it to Joe Schmo, because I don't want it under. Right now, Apple does not have that capability, which is a bit of a head scratcher. And I wish it wasn't the case, but that's the case. So that's why you kind of don't want to do that. But I was surprised to see, and I think that's why SoundCloud is going out of business, because you do have the Gimlets that are using SoundCloud, and they're paying their $15 a month, and then they're streaming terabytes of information. So that's so yeah. So if you're using SoundCloud, again, it's time to get out of the pool and use them if you want to as a secondary one. Sean has a question here out at again, we're at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. If you want to jump in, it's askthepodcastcoach.com/join. But Sean has a question here in the chat. Says, when I record with my ATR 2100 USB directly to Audacity, no problem. When I try to record XLR through the new Behringer 802 mixer into Audacity, it cuts off the amplitude at 0.5. What am I doing wrong? Warning, I bought a mixer, but not very little about the dials. Okay, so that's going to be part of it. Number one, I don't think, and Sean, if you can put this in the chat, is that a USB mixer? Because I know there's an 802 and then there's an 802, I think U is the USB version. So I know I've had in the past, I don't know if this is the case as well, I have found if I use a USB mixer and use the USB part of it, I've always had, in some cases, problems getting a good recording level. It's not USB. Okay, so what you want to do is start off with, you have your channel volume and your main volume. And so I always use the analogy of, you also have a gain knob at the top of the channel. I always say the gain knob is a little bit like, if we go back to your hose on your house, right? You have the knob on the house that you turn, and the more you turn that on, boy, the more the actual, what is that thing? The nozzle has more juice coming out of it. So the gain, if you turn the gain up, man, if you barely move that slider, whoo, it takes a lot of It doesn't take much to do that. So I usually put the gain somewhere around 12 o'clock, and then I will slide up the slider to about 0, and then I'll move you don't want the channel slider to be louder than the main slider. So in that one, it's knob. So if you have the main volume at say 10 o'clock, you wouldn't want the channel volume at like 2 o'clock. That's called overdriving, and that in some cases, not all cases, but in some cases will cause distortion. And so I always try, and this is where it's kind of weird, because I've had some mixers where I will have the best sounding audio and not a single green light blinking anywhere. And then I've got other ones where I've turned the gain way up to make sure I've got 2 or 3 green lights almost hitting the yellow, and it's a giant ball of hiss. So this is where I say what I usually did to do is record into Audacity and record what you're doing. So this is where you can say, all right, the main volume's at 12 o'clock, the channel volume's at 10 o'clock, the gain is about 9 o'clock, and this is what it sounds like. Now I'm going to turn this up to, and then vote with your ears. But in the end, it just sounds like you're not getting enough volume out of it. So the easy thing would be to turn the main volume up, and that will then adjust. And then also in Audacity, you have a volume knob as well. And this is where things get tricky, because you could turn the gain way up in Audacity, but have a really awful signal in the mixer. So this is where it takes. So this is one of those, like, get comfy, get yourself a nice drink, and kick back in a chair and just play with the knobs. Jim, any other?
Yeah, I always set everything to 0. Yeah. And then the sliders or the knobs, right? The volume, it's kind of what I call that. Bring that up to infinity or 0, right? So it's all the way open. Then begin to talk in it, listen and with a meter running the output. Begin to turn your gain up until it gets to that spot where you like it. Then and you got to kind of mess around with that. The gain also controls the field, right? How much is coming in, how sensitive the microphone is going to be. So set that to 0, set the gain. Then you can push your slider down or turn that all the way to the volume piece. When you want to shut the mic off, then you turn that off and you don't mess with the gain. Typically, once you got the gain set the way you want it, you never touch it again. You just leave it right where it's at. That's the slider, the volume that you mess with. USB and XLR use different hardware inside the microphone. So they are completely different. They're separated inside the mic. You can break your USB and still use the XLR in a lot of cases, and it'll work. So you want to, and some mics, depending on the mic you're using, take different amounts of gain, so to speak. They're not all the same. Some mics are gain hungry. So we think about these ATR 2100s, super gain hungry. You've got to turn them up, or you have to put a amplifier in between a Fed head or a cloud lifter. Yeah. You put those in between your microphone and the mixer to give it more gain. A lot of the cheap boards, which is what you have there, let's call them inexpensive boards, don't have very good preamps, and so they're not amping that mic at all. And so you might have to crank that gain all the way to get it done. And so you got to kind of work with it to figure it out. I'm on a Mackie FX Pro 12. And I've got on this 2100, I've got the gain pushed pretty high to get it to where I like it. It would probably benefit me to put something in between the mic and the mixer to boost that, raw signal coming in, that raw analog signal coming in. So it's, that's kind of the way I like to do it, and do it slowly. And Dave, I love your recording tip. Record in exactly what you're doing so you can go back and listen to it. Because if you have a minute of recording and you're messing with a couple knobs, you'll never remember what you did when you're messing with those knobs. So super important that you record what you're doing.
Yeah, he says, what's more important, the main volume or the channel volume?
Well, it depends on where you're pulling, what you're pulling, right? If you're going off the main into your PC, then that's super important, right? I mean, they're both important. You got to get them set both right so that they're working. So gain first. The slider volume is just a local, am I on or am I off? Am I quiet or am I loud? Am I pushing full? Like your hose example, right? You get that gain, that's the pressure, right? So maybe I have 15 pounds of pressure coming out at the end of the house. Then that volume slider, volume knob, that's that that's the sprayer, and you can choose how much or how little of that 15 pounds of pressure that you have coming out of your house with that slider. The main is really designed for the whole mix. So when you have all your channels working, what's everything coming out together? Now, as podcasters, oftentimes we're only using one channel, which is a little bit of an overkill to use a mixer for one channel, but it works. I do it too. So the main volume coming out then it will also dictate if you're recording off the main volume, it will dictate how loud it is. So if it's quiet, you're going to get a quiet recording. It's the final end product of your board.
Yeah. And the other thing you have to keep in mind, like I could turn the main volume all the way up, and then I barely have to turn the channel volume up at all. Why? Because it's really but it's, you'll hear when in almost every mixer, when you get, especially with a gain button, so let's take that example. Let's say I turn the main volume on 10 and the channel volume on 2. That's a total of 12. That may sound horrendous because I have a very little signal coming in that's getting really, really amplified by the main. Whereas if I put them both on 6, okay, now the channel volume is much louder and I don't have to amplify it that much with the main volume. So I wish there was like a just do this, do that. Jim kind of had the stuff where you set the gain about 0, do this, and just start from there. And then it is just a matter of tweaking. And I remember I have a Yamaha mixer that I like the sound of it, but it always bugged me the fact that I had no green lights blinking. And in logical world, that made no sense. But I had tested it, and I would do all the stuff to get the lights to blink. And the minute I shut up, it was just, and I was like, oh, that's not going to work for me. So.
Yeah, it's like any problem. It's like troubleshooting any problem. Get everything to 0 and then begin to add. Don't add everything and try and subtract. That's just too hard. Get it all to 0 and add as you go.
And speaking of that, if you have with that mixer, you have multiple channels, anything you're not using, turn to 0. So all the volume knobs at the bottom do that. So
Sean, we're not, this is what we're here for, by the way. Sean's like, hey, I don't mean to monopolize. No, this is what we're here for. We love these questions. We talk about this the rest of the day if you let us. It's good stuff. I think it's one of those, I think the mixer, Dave, is one of the harder, besides software or the PC, the mixer is one of those things that's really, really confusing for the average guy. It's just really hard. There's a lot of knobs.
Well, that, and remember, unless you're, doing things where you're mixing in music or sound effects or things like that, you may not need a mixer. If there's the thing is, if there's somebody in the room with you, right, you and your co-host, okay, you need to mix them because they talk really soft and you talk really loud. So you need to, that's hence mix. You mix the volume so they're the same. If you're playing live music or sound effects or whatever, then you need a mixer. If you're not doing either of those, you technically don't need a mixer. I had somebody, I was a new member of the School of Podcasting, was asking me what I use for the School of Podcasting. He said, well, lately, I said, call me crazy. I use an ATR 2005. I go into Hindenburg Journalist. I said, I'm sitting here and I'm ignoring $800 worth of equipment. And he goes, why do you do that? I said, because it's easy. I said, it sounds weird, the fact that I don't have to, pull out an SD card and put it in and transfer it over. I said, I just adjust it with EQ. I said, now, does it sound as good as the other stuff? I said, no. I said, but there are times when I'm just like, you know what? This is already plugged in. I don't want to unplug in and move my headphones and do this and that. I said, as long as it's I'm so not the audio nerd when it comes to that. To me, like, if it's listenable and it's not annoying, good enough. Now this week I'll probably use this stuff, he said, hitting his microphone. That's we could tune things to that. And, but to me, I'm not an audio nerd.
2 words, good enough, right? It's just, sometimes it's just good enough for what you're doing, and you can overthink this. Sean, you did the right. I mean, having a mixer is super handy.
Mm-hmm.
Watch, there are tons of YouTube videos on mixers, and you could even narrow that down to the exact mixer you have. Ray Ortega does has some nice work around mixers, especially setting up a mix minus. And so, if you're watch some videos, it's amazing. There's just tons of stuff out there, Sean, and spend a half a day getting educated around it. It's worth knowing the board first before you start using it. So maybe getting a little education around it specifically to the board, and then trying to mess with it is helpful. You can set that thing up wrong, and then in the middle of an interview it can go wrong and you have no idea what to do. That's super frustrating. So you want to know your board.
Yeah. Grant has a question. I just had it, and about Libsyn. If you begin hosting at Libsyn and start with the basic stats, can you upgrade to the advanced stats later and see the stats from the earlier period when you were using the basic stats? And the answer is yes, you can. So if you just want to start off with the $5 plan or the $7 plan where you just get the basic download stats, when you turn on the advanced stats, you'll see all this. We're collecting that data. We just, for the basic package, you don't get to see it, but when you upgrade to the advanced package, you get all your back data. So that is there. Also, there was some news about this. It looks like Spotify is available for everyone. Not really sure about that. What was found is something that their customer service was using. And there's a form online where you can now submit your podcast to Spotify. That's the good news, because I asked Rob about this, Rob Walsh from Libsyn. I said, hey, it's like, you know, because we were kind of like an exclusive kind of thing. You could go through Libsyn. I think you could go through Blueberry too. And I said, this seems to be open to the public. I said, does this mean they're finally opening the floodgates and letting everyone in? Because we talked to them at like 2 years ago at Podcast Movement and said, you really should just let everybody in instead of this whole process. And Rob says, no, that has not changed. He'll probably talk about this on the feed, but they're still only letting in about 10% of what we send them. So I know at Libsyn, you send an email to rob@libsyn.com, and say, I would like to be, submitted to Spotify. And we make a list and we go, here's people we think you would like in your directory. And you almost want to yell pull, because they only let in about 10%. So there is this form out there now. I don't know that that's going to be letting everybody in. According to Rob, it's not. Nothing's changed. There's a new form that you can use. But because
I submitted 2 weeks ago, right? I think is when we talked about that form here on the show. I submitted during the show. Haven't heard anything. Zero. Don't know if I'm in. Don't know if I'm not. It's been 2 weeks. They probably got. Don't you think they just got blasted? Like all of a sudden that form, now there's 1 million, and they're like, oh crap. So I don't have much hope. I don't know anybody out there in the chat room. Did that work? Did that form work? I don't use Spotify, so I don't really even know how to check it. I mean, I guess I could log in, create an account. I bet I have some kind of account with them. But
that's the other question. I mean, with Libsyn, you set up a special feed for them, and we have a thing where you can. I wonder if is this going to mess things up if I plug in an ATR in the middle of a Hangout? Is it going to try to switch?
It won't. It may or may not work.
Well,
you may have to drop it because sometimes
use it. I'm going to use it somebody asked a question about levels, and I was going to show them. So I'm setting up the next question as I speak.
Yes, a little iffy if that's going to work.
So my question is, if you're not using, like Libsyn has a thing into Spotify's API or vice versa, and for the record, that hasn't been updated in months, and that's not a Libsyn thing. That's a Spotify thing. They kind of broke their own stats in a way. And so my question is, if I'm not going through Libsyn or Blueberry or whoever is like an official, how are you going to get your stats? So that's the other thing that I think somebody just found a form and it wasn't really meant for the public. Now I have nothing to base that on. That's just my thought. That's an opinion. But I've now plugged in the ATR. Hopefully things won't crash and burn here.
We'll give it a second to see if I can stop hearing you.
Yeah, so I think we're good, because I would have to change the little gear thing.
Yeah.
So I tried to leave a SpeakPipe message about controlling your RSS feed using Spreaker. Okay, Kyle, what happened? If you go to schoolofpodcasting.com/contact, I've got a SpeakPipe button there. And you could use that. You could also call it in 888-563-3228. Haven't said that number in a long time.
Or you can join us right now, Kyle.
Yeah,
Kyle's one of my listeners, so it's good to see you over here, Kyle.
Podcastcoach.com/join.
And if I knew the question, I use Spreaker's RSS feed for all the Gallup podcasts, so I think I might understand it just a little bit. Boy, they brought, speaking of that, Spreaker has brought their new CMS system to the way you submit and edit a podcast now for them. And it's really pretty cool. You know, it used to be the stats and the monetization section, right? They've been slowly moving things over. So now when you submit a podcast, the way you edit it and submit it is in their new CMS. And it's really, really cool. They have a lot of helpful tips and some things. It's a little busy, but they've got some helpful tips. The process hasn't changed, but the front end has. And so they're doing some cool things over there. Spreaker really does a good job of changing things and not breaking them. That seems to be, and a little, they had the I won't see even a debacle, but a little bit of conversation around they showed stats, then they didn't. Right. Now you can either turn them on or turn them off, which is awesome. A little interesting experiment, but some good stuff going on in Spreaker. So Kyle, you can either send us a note or jump in.
That brings up a good point. I saw this in a Facebook group again. Somebody had asked a question about how do I use Skype to record on Spreaker? And they were asking in Facebook. And I cannot stress this enough. The best place to ask a question about Spreaker or Blueberry or Libsyn or Podbean is at, you guessed it, Spreaker, Blueberry, Libsyn, or Podbean. So I went over to Spreaker, went to the help, and literally had an answer in 3 seconds. They had a tutorial on how to do it. So, I understand sometimes you're in Facebook, hey, I'll just ask these people. So I say this because I want you to get your answer quickly, and I want you to get an accurate answer. That's the other fun thing. So when you have a question about your hosting provider, the best thing to do is to ask your hosting provider.
Yeah, go to the source. That's the interesting thing. Both Libsyn and Blueberry and Spreaker have really good customer service. Libsyn's a little sketchy. I don't know. They've got a guy over there. He's not very attentive, and he's, so you got to be careful with Libsyn. No, I'm just kidding. But lots of those services just have a great customer service. Go right to them. So we get that all the time, David Gallup. People put it in the Facebook group. I'm like, guys, I'm going to answer it. You could just send me the note. It could be a lot easier. So John, there's no call-in number. The best thing to do is to join us. AskThePodcastCoach.com/join if you want to jump in here. No, and we'll get your video. So, but we don't care if you're still in your jammies.
Yeah, we had almost
put a shirt on.
It was like 14 with no shirt on, and his brother's like, "Shut up! I'm trying to sleep." That was excellent.
That was a good one. Kyle left a note. He's like, I think I saw this on Twitter. Wish he would have asked his question. The Kyle who was just in the chat room had asked.
Yeah, there was.
Yes. He's like, I sure wish that he'd asked his question. And
I thought about that. I'm glad he said that. In fact, I'm going to write that down. I should have a button, a big button.
There we go.
Ask the question. Click here to ask a question.
Yeah.
Answer it later.
So, John, I assume this is you?
Yeah, this is me.
Hey,
it's Jonathan. I was at work. I had to go. I got in my office. But I had a quick question. And I've been trying to get this answered. I got a podcast for about a year, and I had like 65 followers on Spreaker for the longest time. And I just got over 70,000 listens. And all of a sudden, I don't know if I called into a podcast. I don't know. It was a pretty popular podcast. And basically overnight, I got like 300 more followers. And every day I'm just getting follower after follower after follower. And I know you guys talked about bots. And did I get a bot?
Here's the thing, because it's weird. I have this question on both ends of the spectrum. One is, oh my gosh, I got a bunch of new listeners. What's wrong? And then I also get, oh my gosh, my numbers just went in the tank. What's wrong? It's the internet in a way. So if you got a bunch of people on Spreaker in terms of what do they call them over there? Followers.
Yeah.
All it takes is somebody with a decent sized audience to say, hey, I just listened to John's podcast. Man, is it good? Boom. And you'll get it's like somebody turning a spotlight on you. And then if you have a back catalog, what will happen is they'll go, oh, wow, this is good. I like this. And then they'll just start downloading your back catalog. So if you have, 30, 40 episodes and 10 people download 30 or 40 episodes, that's a pretty big bump. That's where you can get a bunch of downloads. So it's not always a bot. There are some gray areas. There's a programming language called Python that can be used for good or not so good things. And so when I see that come through on stats, you can't really tell, is this a bot or not? So, and the fact that it could be something good, we at Libsyn let those go through. So, but
probably not a bot on Spreaker though. I don't know of anybody that's done that on the Spreaker platform. The show that you were on, is that a Spreaker show? Is that done into Spreaker? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's done in the Spreaker. Now, you see, I do a sports show. So, and when I go to Spreaker, my sports show is actually there. You can, if you look up football, you'll see me there. I don't know if that had, but the thing is, I see a lot of foreign people because I was like, that doesn't make any sense. So I see a lot of foreign people as a follower. Some of them have pictures and some of them don't have pictures. So I'm just trying to, because my numbers compared when I first started per episode have fallen off like dramatically. You know, I was averaging almost, 800, to 1,000 people. Now it's like barely 100. But
on Spreaker.
The followers are on Spreaker.
Yeah.
But I also have a link into iTunes and YouTube and Stitcher. But I have no idea what those numbers are.
Yeah.
So
Rob Greenlee on the most recent Spreaker live show was just talking about followers on the Spreaker platform. So you can go back and listen to that if you want. But Rod made a statement, and I thought, oh my gosh, everybody's going to do this. He said, well, I go out and follow people that that may be potential listeners. And that way, if they follow me back, they get notified when the show goes live. I have a feeling what happened. So he says that they get a whole bunch of people to listen to that Spreaker live show. Those are all people, not all of them, but there's many of them that are on Spreaker. We might have had like a snowball effect where all of a sudden people were like, oh, I can follow on Spreaker. Let's go do that. And you just may have had a whole bunch of people try to all at the same time, kind of create that effect of following you, hoping that you would follow back. So that could be that as well. I think the point is it doesn't really matter because engagement is what matters. So if your emails from your listeners, if you're whatever you're doing on Twitter, if the downloads can be a little sketchy sometimes, but the engagement you're getting back from your listeners, if that is increased, that's a good thing, right? That's what you're looking for. All the other stuff can be gained.
Yeah, because I used to always get plays, but no downloads. But now I'm getting way more downloads than plays, which doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it does, though, because that means they're subscribing now. So they've listened to you on Spreaker, and they're like, oh, I want to get this automatically. And so they have switched over from listening live or listening on Spreaker, and they've taken it to their device.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hey, one more question. I can't believe it. My mic, my ATR 2100 just died on me. I don't know if I just left it plugged in too long. It died on me, but I just bought a Blue Yeti. What is the best way to do live calls? I just scrapped my mixer because the mixer I used it through Spreaker. It's sometimes it just came a little cumbersome. But what's the best platform you think to use for live calls? Skype or Google?
To stream it live, you mean, or is just to record an interview?
Yeah,
to stream it live.
To stream live.
I would say
to take like live calls.
Yeah, what I'm doing is Google Hangouts because you have things like Blog Talk Radio, you have Call-In Studio. Blog Talk Radio is easy. It just sounds like anytime you use the phone, it's going to sound like this. There's no way around the phone not sounding like the phone because of the technology of the phone. So
right
here is I started Google Hangout. I go up to the very top and I grab the really long, ugly URL, and I use Pretty Link on my website. So that's why askthepodcastcoach.com/live redirects you to this. Now, the bad news is if I wanted, like, let's say you were, I don't know, doing crazy stuff and dancing around naked. Okay, I can eject you, but that means you can't get in, which would be great because you're doing crazy stuff. If I accidentally, like, let's say you asked a question, you're like, good, and you're just becoming somebody that I kind of don't want on the show, but I still want you to listen. If I eject you, you can't listen to the rest of this episode. So you kind of have to allow people to know when it's time to leave, and they'll leave. And I've never had a problem with that. I've never had more than one person call in. So far, it's not a problem. But those are really the ways to get call-in stuff on live. It's either a phone or they're going to join your video.
Well, you joined us and you sound great. I mean, this is the great thing is most people's phones now will do this really, really well. We only see your eyes, but for an audio, no, you're good. For an audio, right? It's awesome. Like we hear you, your sound is great. It's so much better than a phone call. And you saw how easy it was to get in. We said, askthepodcastcoach.com/join, and you were here. So this
actually wasn't that easy. I I had because you got to download. If you do it on your phone, you got to download Hangouts first, and they'll take you to a link.
Yeah.
If you go through the website, it'll take you to a link, and they'll say it's installed, but you got to go to the Play Store, install it.
That's
it's
true.
It's a little bit. It's
That's
a little
true.
bit. A lot.
No, you're right.
A little bit.
Right. Yep.
And
No,
then,
you're right about
yeah.
that.
Nick
Yeah,
Super-
but the only problem with the when I use the Google phone, I can't during my podcast it rings, and I don't know how to cut that out.
Nah.
yeah, well,
and-
what you
and-
can
and
do,
suck.
yeah, if you use like Google, like a Google Voice, and have it go to your cell phone, you could put the cell phone into the mixer, and then you could stream it out, whatever you're.
Oh,
streaming.
really?
Yeah. So I've done that. I mean, I could basically. I don't think this will fit. I'll try this.
With a 3.5 to was it 3.5 jack?
Yeah, that's basically like, and then what you do is they're hearing you on the phone. So I would basically, if you called in, I would basically have to do this. And you're hearing me on the phone because you called into the phone. The phone goes into my mixer. I send that out to the Google Hangout. So my audience can hear you. You hear me through that, and my audience hears me through the microphone. So that's the cheap way to take a phone call. You basically get a cable that you just unplug this.
Doesn't look great.
Doesn't-
I mean, it's kind of, Nick Suberling has said in the chat while Dave's doing that, he uses call-in studio, and it does require a second PC. And I think if you're going to take call-ins, having a second PC is helpful anyways. So,
Okay.
go ahead, Dave.
Call-in studio is that a software or is that just an app?
It's a service. Yeah.
It's a service.
It's like $6 a
Oh.
month plus X amount of money per minute. It's cheaper than Blog Talk Radio. Blog Talk Radio, the last time I checked, was like $40 a month.
I'm not doing blog. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, but Call-in
It
Studio
does sound terrible, literally.
cool, but
Yeah.
this is the cable. I have this end to plug into my phone, and then on the other end, it was just RCA's, and I grabbed these little adapters, and I plugged that into my mixer. And
Nick is saying too, call-in studio has a screener ability too, right? Folks can come in, you can screen them before they join the show. So there's some.
I was on Glenn the Geek show a couple weeks ago, and so I call in and I can hear the show, and then all of a sudden his wife comes on and he's like, "Hey, who's this? What would you like to talk to Glenn about?" I'm like, "Hey, this is Dave Jackson." She's like, "Oh, great. Here, hold on, let me put you on hold." And then what she does is she's on a computer in another room, and she'd be like, "Dave, this is Dave, ready for the thing." And then Glenn can see that on his computer, and when he clicks a button, it's like, "Put that person on." Then so it's a legit call screening kind of program. It's cheaper than Blog Talk Radio. It's just not cheap. I think my bill usually was about $8 an episode by the time it was done. And you can do things to limit that because you can say,
Is it like Uber Conference?
kind of. We tried Uber Conference, and technically I could use Uber Conference. The thing we hated about Uber Conference was the same thing. When somebody calls in, you got this big bing. It was like, okay, and here comes Jim. All right, and here comes Jill. And it was like there was no way to cut that stupid sound out. It was really annoying. So because that was free, that was cool.
Yeah.
But that would be a way to do that. And again, maybe if you because the problem is the more you add, the more you need either 4 arms or another person. And so with Uber Conference, you could do that. You'd have to have it muted. But then the problem is I can't just mute Jill. I'm muting everybody that's on the call. So it would take some playing around with. If you just did one call at a time, you could go into your mixer, and if your mixer had a mute button, you could do that. But again, think about this. You're either hitting a mute button or you're turning down their volume. Meanwhile, you're doing a live show, and you're talking to your audience, and then you're like, okay, let's go back to Steve, turn it back up, this and that. And now you're going to like, okay, thanks, Steve, for doing this. And now you're going to hang up on Steve, and you don't know it's Steve until he calls in. And somebody's calling. If you listen to the earlier versions of Ask the Podcast Coach where I use a phone, I'd be like, phone number ending in 5697. You're on with Dave and Jim. What's your name and what's your question? Because I had we didn't have a call screener. And that's where you'd have somebody call in and me, Baba Booey, and then they'd leave.
Yeah.
So it's,
John,
it's
Nick threw a link to a video that the way he does it using call-in studio in the chat room. So when we're done here, you want to pop back and grab that link. You might get an idea how he's using it, and that might help as well.
Yeah, and you guys only use Chatwing to get you guys because I tried Google and then it's only Chatwing to get in your chat room, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
Google
All right.
doesn't allow you to put links to anything.
Okay.
Yeah, that chat's not very good. We should be monitoring it, to be honest with you. We should be monitoring that chat room there because of people who, like you, found it through Google or Google Plus or whatever, and then you're expecting us to answer in that chat room, and of course we're not there. So
I did not put in the notes. We do not use the Google chat.
Yeah.
We're over there if you want anything. So
Chatwing has a lot more functionality.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, if I was you guys, that pretty link that you use, I think you might want to change the URL to where it either goes right to the app for them to download it, because it does say that if you have an Android phone, it'll tell the person, because I guess it's a beta site or something like that. It will tell them that it's installed when it's not installed.
Interesting. Fine.
Oh, okay. I gotta go.
Good feedback. All right, John. Thanks a ton, man. Good having you.
All right. Thank you, man.
Take care.
Yeah.
And before I forget, I want to thank our awesome supporters, especially Josh Rivers from CreativeStudio.Academy. Josh Liston does the Podcaster Survival Guide. You can find him at tpsguide.org. And I mentioned him earlier, the one and only Glenn the Geek Hebert, America's horse husband. You can find him at horseradionetwork.com. To see the rest of our awesome supporters, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. So I appreciate everybody's help on that. And we did have another fun question. We kind of talked about this already. Any tips or tricks for my podcast to play louder? I have the volume up on separate microphones and the overall track is still lower than it should be. So yeah, we just explained
amp it
with a mixer.
You gotta amp it.
Yeah. I did see this from Todd Cochran, the guy over at blueberry.com. If you're not using them for a media host, they do also offer advertising. And Todd wanted everybody to know we've had several podcast ads, different deals coming in this year, wanting to advertise in military or veteran related podcasts. And I know Rob Kern does a veteran related one, Living the Vet Life. He says this specific demographic is pretty hot at the moment. I'm also very cautious that I'm overly protective because Todd served in I believe the Navy. He says, so I don't want to run a campaign unless as a veteran, I can see the value. I never tell the media buyers I'm a veteran. This gives me an advantage in being able to screen things before we present the deal to creators. I've tried to instill in our team on all deals that we, basically that they work on. He says, we too often now campaigns are coming in that I wrinkle my nose at. I'm not sure what he means there. Have you walked away from an ad deal because it does not fit? So let's stick with the first part of that. And that is the fact that if you are a veteran type related podcast, you want to go over to, I think you just email Todd at ceo@rawvoice.com. We'll get you directly to Todd and say, hey, I have a veteran podcast. Send him a link to it so he can listen to it. But it sounds like that is something that's kind of hot at the moment. So definitely keep that in mind. And I thought this was a good question. Man, time is flying by. Holy cow. Jim, I thought you would, especially because you do a lot of interviews, what do you do to ensure that your podcast guests have the best experience possible?
Call them in advance.
Yes.
Do not let this go down to the, hey, we're going to do an interview, especially if you're doing it live. Now, if it's a recorded interview, you've got the time to do that, where you might be able to work it out all in one session. But we do an advanced call because we're live. So we do an advanced call and we separate it by a couple days between that and the actual call. One, if they have technical problems, we can help them over the next couple days get those fixed. Two, we separate them from the stress of getting connected and their interview. There's nothing worse than spending 30 minutes trying to get something fixed and your guest's all frustrated. And then you start asking them, okay, let's go into the show. Now we're ready for it, but the guest is, they're sweating and they're just, they're all frustrated and they're probably mad at you. And so the best experience I've had is do a quick technical call and let's just make sure your gear works. And I think even if you're not doing a live show, you might say, hey, I'm just going to do can we do a little 15-minute technical call just to make sure everything's working before our interview, just so you know how it works. And I still think that one, it makes them feel like a big deal, but two, it helps you work out the kinks, and they're not coming to the interview all stressed out. So that's my number one.
I think it also makes you look more professional. They're like, hey, we are taking this seriously. We want to make sure we don't have any, wrinkles or bugs. I think another one too, just to make sure it's a great experience, is just to remind them that if it's not live, remind them that it's not live, and that anything they say can be edited out.
Well, light's a big deal too. I mean, Dave, I don't know, like people don't know how to light themselves, and that's not bad. They just don't realize, they'll, like, I have people show up all the time and they have great views out of their office, and so they try and show up with the camera pointing out the window. Well, we know these webcams don't do that, right? And we our office in London is just in the most beautiful part of the city, and every time I take a call from our London folks, they're trying to show London out their windows, and like, oh, the view is so good, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't even see you, like, you're so dark. So getting the light right is important as well.
That would be like me doing this. Hi.
Right.
Yeah. All of a sudden I just turn into this shadow. That's just not a good idea.
No, it's awful. But they don't know that. Like, the average guy does not understand lighting. And so if you're going to be a video podcast, you might want to do this sound and light check where you just like, hey, is that a good spot? And then you can move them around. Like, oh, no, let's try this angle. And let's try that angle. Okay, let's do this. Now, when you show up for the interview, let's do it exactly like this. And that has really cut down on the stress for my guests.
Yeah. And I always let people know that I'm going to make them sound as good as I can. I've been thinking about I'm going to play a little bit of this. If you recognize the person, I'm not going to say their name. They were not a bad guest. I think they were a little nervous maybe. And just to give you a clue. Now, some of this is me, by the way, as well. Let me make sure I got the volume up. Here we go.
But like, so like, I don't know, like, it might like, but like,
okay, that goes on for 2 minutes. I have 2 minutes of just my favorite one on this show is "and." I'm thinking of something else, and and it's something I say while I'm waiting for my brain to come up with the next thing coming out of my mouth. You don't have to do that, but if I want my guest to promote the show, I want them to sound good. And so I went through and just happened to notice at the beginning that this particular guest had a little bit of a catchphrase, like my "and." And then as soon as I found it, I was like, holy cow, this person does this a lot.
A lot.
And so I went
We all do it a lot, to be
so
honest. It's really hard not to.
And the other thing I have found, I'm kind of shifting the topic a little bit, but just in terms of editing, again, you don't have to do that. But I have found a lot of times I will ask somebody a question and they will give me an answer, but they won't answer the question. And so what I do then is I look at that answer and go, is that something my audience wants to know about? And if they don't, see about the question and the answer, go out. I was listening to Jeff Brown, who does Read to Lead, and he's an old radio guy. Really funny story. He it was on Podcast Movement Sessions. Didn't even know there was a Podcast Movement Sessions podcast, and he was explaining how he got fired because there was this big he was, I think, in Indiana. Of course, Indiana is really big in the baseball or basketball. And he did all day. It was all about this big game, the big game. And here comes Jeff at like midnight. And he made a joke about basketball and how they were tired of talking about it. And he made like a vomiting sound and actually got him fired. And he said, but here I am, a radio guy. And he goes, we have the ability to go back and make things sound better. He goes, as a radio guy, that is such a gift. Because they're used to just, it's live and it went out. He says, because if I had the ability to edit it, he might have actually gone back and taken that out. But when it's live, you don't. And so, but I think in the end, the other thing I would say with Jim's thing about calling people, always, and again, I'm slightly skewing the answer here. This will make interviews more enjoyable for you. Always email them the day of to say, hey, just a reminder, I'm looking forward to talking to you tonight. 8 p.m. Throw in that time zone and a link to the meeting if you're going to do something like that. Because I cannot tell you the number of times that the time I don't do that is the time I'm sitting there going, I wonder where they're at. I wonder where they're at.
Yeah, you send them the link and you're like, hey, come join me. And then you're waiting, you're working on the side. And all of a sudden it's 10 minutes later and you're like, oh, yikes. I'm supposed to do an interview. They never show up because you didn't remind them. That's a super awesome tip. I try to that morning send them a note, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, however we connected the first time. And just remind them, hey, 7:45, I'm sending a link to you, 7:45 Central. We start at 8. So, if I do that, we have very low failure rates. If I don't, they kind of go up.
Well, we got another question. This kind of ties into what we're talking about from Andrew. We're just going to call him Andrew Deitch, maybe. It says, hey guys, I had an unfortunate thing happen. One of the guests on my podcast recorded an episode last week and shared a lot of stories, including some about her family. I had her re-listen to the episode to let her know if anything she said should be edited out. She said, nope, everything's fine. And I was good to upload it, which was good. I do that at the end of an interview. I'm like, is there anything in there you would want taken out? So she kind of did that later. She says, after I uploaded it, her mom listened to the podcast and my guest had gotten some of her facts wrong. So much so that her mom would not speak to her. And she is really, really mad. When she told me about this, I told her that I would fix it. I would take down the episode and that I would edit it to make sure that everything with her mom is good. Now, my question is, how do I avoid this in the future? And how do I make sure that old versions of this episode are removed from iTunes and other podcatchers? Oofa. So the first thing I will tackle, as soon as somebody downloads it, it's downloaded. I always tell people the internet writes in ink. So, I think we've all done the thing where you upload an episode and for whatever reason, there's something. My favorite is for a while, I had a bad habit of leaving like 30 seconds of nothing and then you'd hear the ending music again. So you could go through and you can replace that file, but it's from that point forward, your listeners will get the new file. The 180 that got the old file with the mistake in it, nothing you can do about that unless you want to, take
the mail has been delivered.
Yeah, unless you want to bribe them to get it back or something like that. But basically, it's not going to get there. Jim, any idea on how to avoid? Because to me, it sounds like he or she. Let's see.
You're just going to make mistakes, Dave. You're just going to make them, and you fix them when you do. Double check, listen to it yourself before it goes out. Look at the whole file before because in Audacity or Audition, sometimes you can be so focused in on a section and then you're like, okay, I'm done. And you hit save and you don't realize, like in your case, you have a template that you bring in that has the music at the end and it's at the end and you didn't see it because you were focused on a smaller section rather than the whole file. So, bring the whole file in and view it before it goes live. I have caught beeps. We've gotten Hangouts for some reason create this artificial beep in it from time to time, and you see that spike in the WAV file. And if you're not checking the whole file visually, you can miss it. So it's a good idea to get the whole file. Then listen to it yourself. Get out there and get a listen and make sure that you're hearing everything as your audience is hearing it. I check mine on Spreaker all the time. I listen to it in iTunes just to make sure, not every single one, but just to make sure it's going out right.
Yeah. And in regards to the content, I don't know that Andrew could have done anything differently. He asked, is there anything you would like to, take back? The only thing I could think of maybe, but then it takes away maybe from the story, is if and you don't know this a lot of times. You don't know the story that's going to come out of somebody's head. If you could change the names to protect the guilty, well, you don't know it's a story that you're like, holy cow, I can't believe I'm recording this until they're saying it. Most of the time they don't say, yeah, and in this show, I'm going to throw my mom under the bus. I don't think that we know that's coming in most cases. So I think you did everything you can. And like Jim said, when it's a mess, you clean it up. Now, if Andrew wanted to be a weenie about it, he could say, look, you gave me permission. Too bad, have fun with your mom. So I think he did all he could do, and I don't think anybody, oh, this is a great story. Now we're going to run with it. I don't know that you could do anything else. You asked, you let them listen to it. And I understand why this person said it was fine, because it was their version of the story. And as the old saying goes, there's your side, there's my side, and then there's the truth. And so
I've had guests say things they didn't want to say, but they didn't realize that until after I'd published. And so then they contacted me. So, I'd publish Saturday morning, and Sunday afternoon, I'd get a note, a frantic, hey, can you pull 3250 through 3315? Can you just pull that out? Because I can't have that Oh, yikes. I mean, it's another hour. So the edit's the easy part. It's an hour to 2 hours for me to go in and replace that everywhere
You gotta
that I put it, right?
Yeah. So the other thing, the joys of live. I just had it and it went out of my head.
Oh, I hate. What are some tricks? What do you do? So this happens, right? In your live, you may not have a co-host like me that can step in and just start talking for you to kind of cover that. But what are some tips, Dave, as you think about, when you lose your train of thought? I also say when you think about? I say that a lot. When you think about, we're humans, though. By the way, you can't eliminate all these phrases. That's just the way we talk. But when you get stuck, has it come back to you? I'm kind of hoping if I keep talking, it'll come back. No, it's gone.
So this is where I would go. So in a case like this, where I don't know whatever it was, but it's not coming back, I would say I'm sure it'll come to me later. In the meantime, while we're waiting for that, Craig has a great question. If I re-edit past episodes and re-upload the changed files to Libsyn, does it affect the download stats? No. The best thing to do in that situation is, now technically you don't have to. I give it the same file name. So let's say you have, file, and let's just call it episode1.mp3, and it's in this folder. Make a new folder, call it, edited, and do your edits, save it in the edited folder, and call it episode1.mp3. Again, you don't have to do this, but to me, I like it because the stats are easier. Because otherwise, you're going to have stats. You'll click on the stats for that episode, and you'll see that 300 went to the old one, and 150 have gone to the new one. And if you want that, by all means, use a different file name. But use the replace button. You'll go into Libsyn, you'll go into previously published, click on edit, and you'll see there's a button that says replace. And when you upload the old one, it replaces it with the new one, and your stats don't change at all. So one thing to keep in mind, if you're replacing a file in the current month, so if you messed up something in July and you upload it, it doesn't affect your quota. But if I'm updating something from June, that file's already been archived, and the replace is going to count against your July quota. So I know some people want to go back and they'll change the whole, 30 episodes because it had something in it, and they're like, why am I out of quota? Because that's seen as you're replacing something that's been archived. If you're replacing something that hasn't been archived, then you're fine. And that whole can of worms will make people's brain explode. The whole archiving process on all of them. Podbean, it's one of the things.
It's a nightmare. It is just a nightmare. That's the worst day for me, is when I get a guest that says, I need you to pull something. Like, my heart just sinks, and because I know the work it's going to take. For me, it's almost twice as much work to pull it and replace it than it is to just post it. And so I when that happens, and it doesn't happen very often, maybe once a year, maybe even less, my heart sinks. You know that feeling? You just, and I'm like, oh crap. Well, there goes my afternoon. That's shot.
Yeah, Craig says the reason I'm asking is co-host let's see, Chris, is that I'm about to release a new podcast that I'm afraid might get me into trouble with people who take it the wrong way. Was wondering if you might give it a listen and give me some feedback before I go public. Do you mean me or your co-host? Because what I do in that case, I'll just throw it into Dropbox and go, here, listen to this. I have a client of mine that I throw it in Dropbox. She listens to it. Once she gives me the okay, I upload it to Libsyn, and we're good to go. So,
lots of talk about these words that we say all the time. I say this all the time. Try not to eliminate them all. I mean, there are some annoying ones. Yeah, right. But to Emily's point, some of them are your personality, and they're a part of who you are. And so, yeah, you might be annoyed by the fact that I always say, oh, somebody just put that in there. At the end of the day, I say that a lot. So at the end of the day, I say that a lot. But that's part of my personality. That's part of who I am. And you as a podcaster, that's part of who you are and whatever you say. So I think you have to be careful. Don't sterilize your vocabulary.
Right.
And if you get some feedback from your audience that it's annoying or whatever, take it with a grain of salt. If it needs to be fixed, fix it. If not, make it a part of it. I can't change the way I say at the end of the day. It's just not going to happen. Like I'm going to say it. But don't apologize for that. That's who you are. We all have these. It's just part of our vocabulary and part of being humans. And if you don't like listening to it, stop listening to the podcaster who says it. Like, either put up with it or stop listening. But I'm hesitant to want to sanitize because it is a part of who we are.
Yeah, I had a mine back in the day, to use one of my phrases, was basically it's a case of. I would start things off and be like, well, basically it's a case of something. And it was funny. I was writing with I was fixing copiers, and I had a kind of a partner in crime. And I would say basically, and he'd look at me and go, it's a case of? And I'm like, so he just kept pointing it out to where I finally quit doing it. So, and I know Kim from onthetablepodcast.net has said yours is andum. And now I listen for it. And I realize when I do it, it's because I'm trying to think of what to say. But I'm with Jim. We all have them, as long as it's not to the point of annoying people. And
it actually makes you a better speaker in some ways because they're phrases you're comfortable with, and you can go to them while you're thinking of other things. So, use them as a crutch and use them appropriately, but for whatever. And again, I'm not striking back from anything that was said in chat. I think it's all very appropriate, but I do think we have to be careful that we don't sanitize what we say.
Yeah. And Teresa's got a great question. We will answer that in the post show. If you'd like to hear the post show, if you're not here live, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. Become an awesome supporter. You can do it for as little as $1, and you get all of our post show discussion and more. So find Jim over at theaverageguy.tv. You can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com, and you can find us every Saturday at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. Thanks for listening, and stick around for some post show. Now that was some good talk up right there, if I do say so myself.
Nicely done.
It was well done. Teresa asked, which is better for audio? And if you're wondering why did I not say anything for 5 minutes, it makes it super easy to figure out where the post.
It was literally 4 seconds, Dave. It was not 5 minutes. It feels like it.
I know. Which is better for audio interviewing? My audience, Skype or Google Hangouts? I would say Skype. Here's why. It depends on the audience, depends on your guest. Because, well, I take it back. Google Hangouts. She didn't say Google Hangouts on air. The problem is Google Hangouts, well, neither does Skype.
How about the one that works best for you? Both of them work really well, to be honest. I mean, there's another one I say all the time, to be honest. Why would I be dishonest? So, again, I say it's one of those phrases. Either one would work. Just what's best in your ecosystem, like what works best for you. We're finding Hangouts just work flawlessly for us, and Skype does not. And so every time we try to go to Skype or Skype for Business, we just have all kinds of problems. I can get Hangouts working now. I can get Hangouts working because I do a pre-call. So that's part of the success is I do a pre-call. We help the customer get set up before they're on. And so I think that contributes to our success.
Yeah. So I think that I'm with Jim on that. I would ask if you go to your audience and go, hey, I'm going to send you a link to a Hangout, and they go, ooh, what's a Hangout? Then I say, okay, well, Skype. Okay, yeah, my Skype is such and such. So I think I would kind of rely on that. And I think in both cases, although more with Skype than Google Hangouts, I think it depends on their bandwidth.
Yeah. Skype can have really good sound quality. When Skype is on, it is dynamite. Like when it is off, it is awful. And Hangouts, not the greatest, even on its best day, not the greatest audio ever. I'm okay with it, but not the best audio ever. On its bad day, it's pretty tolerable. And it does a lot. I mean, those Google engineers have done a lot of things with people with bad bandwidth and in bad situations of making it work even in terrible situations. So I think get good at one or the other and then just stick with it.
Yeah. I am going to share my screen. I think it was, I forget who was in the chat room, asked about volume. We were talking about volume level, and he asked about Hindenburg, which is why I plugged in the ATR. I think this is going to work. We shall see. So we're looking at Hindenburg Journalist, and if I wanted to talk on this track one, if I click on that, this is well, first of all, under options, I have to say that, hey, my recording is in this case, my 2005. So if I click on that, your audio control is up here. So you can see kind of where I'm coming in down here about -9. and that's all the way up. And so I have an option here. If I want it louder, I've got to just talk louder or get closer to the microphone, which is what I'm doing now. So I'm up about -3. So I just got closer to the microphone. I can adjust this over here. And I will say this, Hindenburg is when you get, if you clip, if I talk really, really loud and I get this, you're going to get distortion. It sounds horrendous. So that's how you adjust the volume level in Hindenburg. You have this little knobby thing, little slider gizmo. And then when you're not recording, if I disarm this, this becomes the overall volume of what you record. So if I were to actually click on this, come down here and click on record, and I would want this up a little louder. And so there's that. And so I hit stop at the bottom. And then in Hindenburg, you have this little gizmo. So I could say I would like to add an equalizer, and I want to boost my bass, maybe my high mins. I want to reduce my noise, so that reduces hiss. And I want a compressor, just because everybody has one and they seem cool. And so, and then what I've done is I have a plugin from iZotope called Nectar. And what I do with that is I say, I would like the podcasting setup, which gives me the ability to, again, boost highs and lows. It's got a built-in noise gate. It's a pretty cool little thing. And that just gives it a little more kind of warmth. And I love their noise gate. That's the biggest thing I love about that plugin. So that's how you adjust the volume in Hindenburg. And that's why I like Hindenburg. Everything I use there. Now, there are other things in Hindenburg that are really made for radio. I'm so confused now. I'm like, which microphone? I feel like the Beatles in 1962. They're up there singing, I Want to Hold Your Hand into 2 microphones. I was actually watching an old video. Actually,
why did they do that?
Yeah, because there was their sound systems, like they didn't have amps loud enough. So they would just plug in a microphone. 2 microphones are louder than one. And I was like,
2 systems, 2 separate systems, but unified together. I don't know. That's bizarre.
Yeah. So I will just do this. Yeah, that's convenient. Just leave the cord in the way. Yeah, so I like Hindenburg because most of the stuff in there I use. So it's a pretty handy little tool. But in the end, use the software that you use that works. I don't think there's one size fits all. I had a same guy that was, I mentioned that I sometimes will just use this to do the school of podcasting because I don't feel like messing with SD cards and switching my things around. And he was kind of like, but doesn't everybody use a Heil PR40? And I'm like, no, I don't.
Now you have to invoke the song.
Oh, I do. Yes.
You said it. You said it.
Thank you, Emily, from the story behind podcast.com. I did say the magic word. It's like Groucho.
We made it a whole hour and 15 minutes without somebody saying Heil PR40.
Yeah, so that was.
I'm so tempted to buy that mic. That's a good looking mic. You know?
If you want to borrow mine, I'll ship it to you if you want to play with it.
No, it's okay. I don't really need it. I mean, I always say I do the average guy stuff, right? And this is really a great average guy mic. And I feel like if I put a 40 on there, I don't know. No, I'm good. I appreciate you doing that. Maybe someday I'll bring you a audio interface and we can swap for a borrowing.
Well, it was funny because he asked me like, well, why did you pick this microphone? I go, I actually didn't. I said, I got it on loan because I read about it, I think in a magazine. But like this was going to be the new vocal mic. It was the little brother to the RE20. And I just emailed the company, the marketing people, not the sales people, and said, hey, can I have one of those to try and I'll ship it back? And they shipped it to me. I liked it. And I said, okay, cool. How do I ship it back? And they're like, well, do you want to buy it? And I said, how much is it? They said $300. I'm like, yeah, no, thanks. I'll stick with, I think back then I had the 58 going. And they said, well, can we barter? And I'm like, I'm open. How about if you talk about it for a month on your show? And I'm like, done. So that's how I ended up with this microphone. Now I do love the fact, because I'm also a big fan of the color black. So I think it looks cooler than the PR40. But in the end, that's a really dumb idea for a podcast. Why do you use that microphone? Because it looks cool.
Well, if you're in video, that might make a difference if you're in video.
So
you know, sometimes too, what makes you feel comfortable? Like remember when you first set this up and you did your very first video podcast and you had the mic. It felt cool. Like you were like, oh, this is great. This is what I've been waiting for. You know, it just felt cool. I think I think size matters. Just saying.
let's see. Sean asked, what mic does Mark Maron use? He uses the Shure SM7B. If you're going to use that microphone, just buy a Fethead or a Cloud Lifter now, because here's one of those things. Well, Michael Jackson used it. Well, Michael Jackson used it in a professional studio where they had things kicking that thing in the butt to get it up. Same thing with a Heil PR40. All these dynamic mics kind of need some sort of boost to get them going. I mean, this one's going into, I used to use a DBX 286, and now it's going through an Aphex 230. But if somebody asked me, what's your favorite compressor? I would say a DBX 286 S. The interesting thing on Amazon, you can't buy them. You have to go through another retailer. I don't know if they're out of stock or what, but I was looking that up last night. So, but that's another one. From Understand, it's a great warm microphone. They're going to have a thing at Podcast Movement. Chris Coran from the Podcast Engineering School is going to basically take the same idea that Mark Johansson did at PodFest and bring, I think, 8 different microphones so you can hear them. And you'll hear the slight difference between this and this and that. And in the end, it's not the microphone, it's the person behind it. One of my favorite videos is there's a really good guitar player. Name is Joe Satriani. He plays in Chickenfoot with Sammy Hagar, and he's been known. He was big in the 80s. And somehow he ended up at a fan's house. I don't know if this was a contest winner or what. And this kid has the typical $100 cheap, rip-off guitar. And Joe comes in, and somehow this kid had a karaoke version of his song. So it was basically an instrumental without the guitar, so this kid could play Joe's part. Well, now Joe is going to play Joe's part, and he's playing this crappy guitar, and it sounded phenomenal. So in the same way that it's not the guitar that makes the guitarist, it's not the mic that makes the podcaster. It's the podcaster. It's the person behind the microphone. It's the person behind the guitar. So, but Grant says, if you get a PR40, you'll begin making money from your podcaster. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, as soon as you get
That's guaranteed at that point. Guaranteed.
Because first you'll hear, the angels will sing, money will fall from the heavens. So, yeah. And again, there's nothing wrong with thinking that the PR40 is the best microphone because everybody talks about it. And I just heard Natalie Ekdahl from the Biz Chicks show, Chicks is CHIX. She uses a PR30, which doesn't have quite as much of that bass boost as the PR40. And she feels it's better for females. And I was like, I didn't even know there was a PR30. I'm sure they have a whole line over there. And did you know that Bob Heil in general is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Really? No, I didn't know that.
There's a Heil display. I have a picture of it somewhere. But
well, it's a good mic.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a good mic. It's got overhyped and some other things, but it is a good, solid. I mean, if you're going to do a lot of this, it's not a bad tool to have in your toolbox. I think mostly it's gotten a lot of it got a lot of popularity, and then there were some folks who didn't enjoy the popularity of it, much less I don't think they were thinking much about the mic as they were thinking about the popularity and who was making it popular. And so it's like SoundCloud. It's one of these weird services that have gotten overhyped negative and overhyped positive comments around it. And I don't know if it's justified, to be honest with you, Dave. It's kind of just a microphone. And it could have been the RE320 or it could have been the RE20 that got that. If a couple of podcasters had decided that's the route they were going to go, it could have gone that way with it. So I'm glad we haven't had this discussion in a while, because I get a little, just a microphone.
Yeah.
It's just as expensive as the mic you have in front of you. And these work and they're fine, and it's it is what it is.
Yeah, I think in the end. And again, this is where we kind of go back to what I was talking about at the beginning. I'm just not an audio snob. And as long as your podcast is not, your sound isn't distracting, and I always point people to Marketing School. Neil Patel and Eric Sue have a podcast whose sound absolutely makes me just batty when I listen to it. But the content's really good. But it always just sounds, like, do I have my reverb set up? Let's see here. Yeah, hi. This is Neil Patel and Eric Sue. It's like, no.
We're in the bathroom.
Why are you podcasting from the bathroom? So, Jim, did you get fished in on Better Podcasting?
No,
You knew it was a trick?
I haven't kept up with the episode.
Spoiler alert, they
I
didn't
know.
fire Steven. So when you hear that
Yeah.
Steven got fired and Emily is on, I got completely fished in. I was
Did you really? You got
Oh.
sucked into it, huh?
I'm
By
so
the
glad,
way-
I'm so glad I didn't send a message. I'm so glad you fired Steven. That guy was a jerk.
Nothing against
10
Steven.
minutes later, I found out it was a joke.
Nothing against Steven or SP, but if Emily's on Better Podcasting every week, I'm back in. I'm just saying. I am just saying. Emily on anything, I'm back in. That's just the way it goes.
So
Yeah.
but,
I'm a big Emily fan. I can't.
he's awesome.
She could read the newspaper, I'd be reading it. I mean, I'd be listening to it. So I'm intrigued, Dave, by your Sleep With Me guy that you had on School Podcasting, and this whole idea. His numbers seem pretty big too,
Dude,
but
I
this
could-
whole idea of helping people go to sleep. I have trouble sleeping, so it was really intriguing to me. Now I haven't listened to his podcast yet, but that subject super niche and super intriguing.
and also he's now getting ripped off. There are many now people.
Oh
doing-
yeah.
because why do the homework? I'll just do what he's doing. That was a case where I had to. Anybody else sounding like is my reverb still on? Maybe it's my headphones. I just sound much more roomier than usual. In the interview, you hear him say, "I don't really like to talk about my numbers," and so it wasn't until later that I was doing something. I was looking for his website, and I Googled him. There he is in the Washington Post. 1.3 million downloads, I think it was, per month. And I emailed him. I said, I know you say you don't like to talk about. I said, so can I mention this Washington Post thing? Because I don't know why you don't want to talk about your numbers. Your numbers are awesome. And he emailed me back. He's like, that's fine. You know, it was like, I said, I'm not trying to do a gotcha or a switch. I said, so if you don't want me to, I said, but dude, you're getting 1.3 million downloads a month. I'm like, are you kidding me? So he was cool with it, but he's a real humble guy. He's super just,
I
and
think that's what it
I meant.
takes. That's what it takes.
Yeah.
Like, he just doesn't have any contention in his voice, and he does. I got to listen to this thing because I'm very intrigued by what he does. But his whole goal is to take your mind off of what you're thinking about and not distract you with something else equally as stressful. So it's pretty awesome. The concept that blew me away. I was like, oh, that is such a great idea. I'm gonna have to listen to. The problem is I'm gonna have to listen to it in another room. So
Yeah.
we need to change rooms.
I always wanted to do the Power Nap show. It's just like, welcome to the Power Nap show, where we, help you get 20 minutes of a power nap in the middle of the day. Find a shady tree, and at the count of, we're going to do the countdown, and I'll let you know when 20 minutes is up. So it'd be like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then just 20 minutes of nothing. And then at the end, hey, thanks for listening to the Power Nap. Tune in next week when I'll say this. Okay. I think it'd be fun.
Oh, the power nap. You would, or maybe even play some nice, gentle music behind the
I used to
music
do
of the universe.
I did a show called Quiet Study Area that I would go out to the now defunct PodSafe Music Network and find just cool, not like, in some cases it was classical, but it was just really quiet music that wasn't kind of like this guy's. Something to listen to that wasn't distracting enough. Because to me as a musician, if it's too cool music, I'll start listening to the music. This was just something to kind of fill up. It was like white noise in a way. And man, I wish I had that show. Like if I did it again, it'd be great. Except now I don't have an access to music. That's the one thing that was really cool about the PodSafe Music Network. There's a lot of really bad music on it, but there was a lot of cool stuff too. So
I kind of do that. I do a show that'll put you to sleep around tech every week. So if you're having trouble sleeping, just download Home Gadget Geeks, and now we have a good time with it. Dave, Sean is saying that you kept calling him super niche, but most like half of Americans have trouble sleeping at times. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So, but it is kind of, when you think about what traditional podcasting has been, it is niche-y, and I may even agree with you, super niche in the area of podcasting. In other words, someone using podcasting to help people do this. I think that's pretty niche-y. I've been around the podcasting space for a long time, and that's the very first time I've heard of that. Doesn't mean it's not out there. So I don't know. That's Sean. It's a good point. It's a very good point.
To me, I always think of a newspaper. You've got the business section, you've got comedy, you've got lifestyle, sports, and local. And those are kind of like, to me, that's how they niche. So even like, and then when you go into sports, okay, now is it football? Is it NFL? Is it Canadian? Is it college? You niche down again. I mean, look at Nick. He went from soccer to, I guess it's minor league soccer. I think, I'm not sure what the league is, and then he said, not the whole league, just the Cincinnati one, so that to me is hyper niche kind of thing. So it's when somebody says, I'm going to do a show for guys that are 24 and up, and we're just going to talk about guy stuff. And I'm like, that's granted, you've niche, you've cut out half your audience. You're not, shooting at females, but
yeah, but there's power in that. I mean, you can get super specific. You're just, you're going to have the right expectations on your numbers. And I think about, what we do at Gallup. It's not just in this idea of strengths-based performance management is not new, and it's a little nichey, but it's getting more and more popular. But around StrengthsFinder, it takes it to another niche, and then we're speaking to coaches and certified coaches in that space. It's even more nichey. So when I look at my numbers and we do a couple thousand, and you're like, well, I'm probably at the peak. I'm not sure I can get, we have to grow the movement to grow the audience. I'm just not sure there's that many more people. So for me, those numbers are good. I'm like, okay, good. I'm in a spot. I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot. I feel like I'm getting 50 to 60% of the community that will listen to podcasts probably are. So we have a big conference coming up, not next week, but the week after. And we have 1,000 customers coming for 3 days to be a part of this conference. And it's a chance for me to meet my listeners.
Is this where you go into rock star mode?
Yeah, this is selfies and all this other stuff going on. So, and people are like, oh, you're famous. I'm like, no, I'm Gallup famous. Like around the Gallup communities, people know me, but nobody knows me outside of that. But it's a great feeling. It's amazing. I'll report back, not next Saturday, but the Saturday after. But it's just a ton of fun to meet your listeners like that.
Is this where your wife keeps extra trash around and stuff? So when you come home from the event, you're like, all right, Jim, take out the trash.
Yeah. Hey, fanboy, get out of here. Get. Could you vacuum for me? No, it's all good. It's a ton of fun to be able to meet the listeners. That's the most important. I tell them all the time, oh, it's so great to meet you. I'm like, hey, listen, you get to hear me every week. I never get to hear from you. So let's talk about you. And it's a great opportunity to meet them. Why do you listen? What do you like the best? It's a great way to get feedback.
Yeah, I've already got that in my head. I'm starting because podcast movement's going to be here real quick.
I know. Can't wait to get there.
And I'm already in my head trying to kind of just remind myself to, when I meet people, like you said, get them talking about them. Because that's really, the more I can learn about them, the better the content I can make for my audience. And the other thing that will do is save my voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tell me about you. That's a great question. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing, or tell me where you've had success, or tell me where we've helped you. How are we helping you? If I can do more of that, that's powerful. So when I have my listeners, I like to say, tell us what are your favorite parts? How are we helping you? I mean, it feels good. Don't get me wrong. It feels good to hear that kind of stuff, but it's actually helpful to be, okay, we should do more of that and less of whatever's not helpful, and ask the question, what's not? What do you hate?
It's interesting because, I wrecked my car and I hit a deer and all that. I have so many people going, when is the What I Learned from My Deer Crash podcast coming out? And I mean, I've had 4 people say, when is that coming out? I bet that's going to be good. And I really wasn't going to go there, but I'm like, well, I have learned some stuff, so I'm like, no, I might spin that around. I mean, if this is what you want to, I just want to be the guy every time I go to something okay, what can we learn from the grocery store? I'm like, well, because you kind of end up saying the same stuff over and over and over. Although speaking of that, here's a question for the audience. Are podcasters entertainers?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I actually went to a concert last night, and it's been a while. Number one, I forgot how bad I rip apart musicians being a musician. That the first guy was just horrendous. And I heard the voice of my ex-wife going, I can't go to concerts with you because you rip everybody apart. But I went and saw Johnny Lang, who's this guy that put out his first album when he was 15. But literally the first guy sounded like Popeye. Do you remember Froggy from the Little Rascals?
Oh, yeah.
And it was weird because he'd say hey, I'm so great to be here. Then he'd go sing his songs this one's called Milk Cow Blues. And he'd be like, that girl, dig your god out. And you couldn't understand a single word he said. I gotta do it. I'm gonna go up. How. In the mojo hand. I'm like, what is a mojo hand? And why does it have to be moved into every blues song? But it was weird. And then every song he'd get done and be like drinking his water. I'm like, of course you need to drink drink water. You're ruining your voice. I mean, can you imagine doing a podcast like that? Welcome to the podcast. They were going to be dead. I mean, you couldn't understand a word. And every time, and my favorite thing was, it was Delta Blues. Now here's the English version of what the phrase Delta Blues means. It means I'm going to do 6 songs that all sound identical to the last one. And it was like that. Do you remember Living Color? You're like, song, it goes to something like that. It was seriously that guy for half. And every time he got done with the song, I'm like, please tell me you're done. Please tell me you're done. It was, so that would be my first rule. How can podcasters, what can we gain from that concert? The fact that there are a lot of bad podcasts out there, and it makes you sound really good if you take any time.
Yeah, anytime at all. I'm gonna have you do some voiceover work with that voice. That is, Dave. You're a man of many talents with that. With
the whole time, I'm like, what? And then he almost sounded like Bob Dylan because you couldn't understand what he was saying. So it's kind of a Froggy meets Popeye. There were times when I was waiting for him to go, oh, Brutus, he had that kind of, oh, God, you don't understand what he's saying. Is that thing. What is he saying?
What kind of accent was that? What was Popeye? Where did that come from?
And of course, nobody noticed Sweet Pea was illegitimate. Who was Sweet Pea's father? We kind of assumed it was Popeye, but not really, because I don't know. That's a whole other tangent. Anyway, so
that's awesome.
Yeah,
your voice talent work just keeps surprising me, Dave. Keeps surprising me.
I was good at doing impressions of aunts and uncles, but nobody gets it when I go, check this out, Uncle Leonard. Who wants milk? Yeah, nobody.
It just doesn't work. The only one I got is Bill Clinton. No, I gotta tell you, those people over there. That's all I can do. That's all I got.
Because he's got that kind of Kardashian thing, where they all have the voice vocal fry.
I love to hear him talk. I know, politically he falls on either side, but right. I'd love to listen. I love to hear him just ramble.
Well, Patricia love that voice. A great thing. Well, I mean, think about Wolfman Jack. Yeah. How did that guy have
any vocal cords left?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, holy cow, it's the same thing. I mean, the Wolfman. Yeah, I can't even. I'd have to go listen to him to see if I could do that. But
yeah, Emily said she loves the power thumb, and I have to get into the voice. You have to do the thumb. I gotta tell you.
Oh well.
Oh, tons of fun. What's going on over? What do you think? Todd and Rob will talk about today on.
They'll probably talk about SoundCloud.
Oh
and
yeah,
and then apparently whatever's on the Pod to Pod website.
Oh, is that what
that's what they're doing? They just go to Pod to Pod and talk about the stories. And
I think Todd is going to throw a party. I mean, if there's one person on the planet who will just rejoice the day that SoundCloud goes away, that's Todd Cochran. He hates SoundCloud with just all his being.
Yeah, I know Rob's not a fan.
Yeah.
So,
well, I know. Again, everybody, and we've seen this coming. This is a train wreck that we have seen coming. But man, some have been a little more vocal than others. Todd will rejoice that. See, I told you. No, you can do Todd way better than I do. Yeah.
Todd is, well, he's got that kind of Todd Cochran new media show. Thanks, guys. All right.
Yeah.
So it's all the.
Oh, I love it.
So
I love it over there at New Media Show.
Rob Greenlee has the thing where about every other word he kind of goes Canadian, where he'll be talking, and it just all of a sudden, I was doing the thing back in I was at Podcast One, and he just has that little every now and then he does a. I need to. It's weird because I was like, how would I that would be one. If I were to do an imitation of Dave Jackson, I would start a sentence that then fragmented into 3 different ideas.
Just explodes. It explodes. It's more fun to watch you. So because you can see the explosion happening in your face before it goes. And then, so it's so much fun being able to, it would not be as much fun if we were audio only. I mean, I like watching your facial expressions as we're talking, because I can kind of tell where you're going. I can also tell when I've hit a nerve with you, because you jerk into the mic. You just go, oh, I got something to say.
I'm ready. So
yeah, it's good.
It would be different going back to just audio only. That would be so.
Did have you seen a lot of SoundCloud folks coming over?
Yeah, it's like yeah, it's definitely because for a while they're always kind of I always get people from SoundCloud, but especially because, and I always kind of think this is not fair. We will import your stuff from SoundCloud for free. If we import your stuff from Podbean, it's a $25 import fee. And I don't know if Mike Dell is here. So in the spirit of Mike Dell, Blueberry will import you for free, but Libsyn charges you. So
Daniel said no media show.
So
No media show today. So nobody has anything to go to after this.
well, that's no fun.
Yeah. Well, maybe they're busy.
Yeah, could be. I
saw Todd and Rob on Podcasters Roundtable this last Thursday, right? You guys were.
That was amazing. Todd had this like cheap $13 headset that actually sounded not bad. He
was in his car.
It was a
Like,
little.
He was sitting in his car doing with the headset. What was like? He was going somewhere. And he just pulled off to the side of the road.
I think he said he was with clients, and he said I've got to go outside because he was somewhere where he still had Wi-Fi.
Okay.
And he would have been there the whole time. His battery died on his laptop.
It was funny because I was watching your Facebook Live. You were talking about your new car, and then you realized somebody had put something in chat about podcaster. I got to go to the Podcasters Roundtable, and you were like, "Well, I do too. I got to go." Oh, 4 minutes. And
yeah.
Then you pulled. You're like, "I got to go." You shut off the.
Like 15 minutes, and then I get in, and all of a sudden I'm like, "That's okay." Wow, that went quick.
It was just fun. How is the new car? You liking it so far?
I love it. It's kind of. It's like anything else, it's got pros. I love the fact that I now have a place to put change. I kind of miss my Bluetooth, but I kind of don't because it used to drive me nuts, especially if I was on the phone and I would get in the car. There'd always be like this weird 1.5 second break where it would switch to the car, even though I didn't want it to. I remember once I actually said no before I get near my car. And I missed the fact that my car used to know when I was close and I didn't have to unlock the door, because it had a fob and a push button. So now I actually have to like use a key. I'm like, oh, how archaic is this?
What?
And I have to, it has the unlock thing.
Okay, all right.
But it used to be, I used to love that about my Prius when it could sense the fob and it would just automatically unlock the door and turn on the light for you. So, but I'm not missing, it's almost $20, I think a month or a quarter. It's less money insurance wise and it's a whole lot less car payment wise. So, and it's actually got to go a little get up and go, a little more than the Prius.
Did you pay the gap? Did you have to pay the gap, or did you roll that in?
I ended up paying what I ended up doing is there was $800 gap, although I think it's less than that because they're going to reimburse me for tax. There's some sort of weird thing where if you buy a new car within 30 days, the tax you paid on the new car, they do. I think
you get those plates back. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the other thing. Just on one hand, you would say, well, why are you sharing the fact that you got hit by a deer with your audience? I've learned so much about insurance. I've had people come out of the woodwork like, let me insure your car. We do a full gap coverage and this and that. So I'm sure it's more expensive too, but it's just one of those things you have to know your policy maybe a little more so you know what you're getting into.
Best cure for a gap is not to have one at all. And so get that, it makes some extra payments, because the car is going to plummet in value.
Yeah.
And so the time to make those extra payments to get that thing paid down is as soon as you get the car, right? Start if you paid full price or didn't put any money down on a car, it is going to devalue faster than you can make payments. So you got to make extra payments early. So that's, I think, the best gap insurance is not to have a gap. Get that thing paid off.
That's the one thing I've done that I haven't done in the past is I actually had money in the bank. So I had it's the Dave Ramsey,
right on baby step number one.
Baby step number one.
Got $1,000. Got $1,000. I can't do him very well, but he.
So I had that going for me in the bank.
Dude, it's super helpful. Like it's, his 7 steps are amazingly easy, and the first 3 are the most important. But having $1,000, you would be surprised how many people do not have $1,000 disposable that they can get access to like that for an emergency. And, I had one myself this week that I needed to pull money out and send off to the IRS. And it was like, hey, you don't want to screw around with the IRS. Just get that thing paid. Right. And so I had the money in the bank, and it was a little painful to write $1,000 check, but you write it and you're glad that you have it. And I think money equals options. And so having a cushion, even as podcaster, having a cushion that you can rely on for things. we've had a bunch of expenses. Daughter's going to college. We had graduation stuff. So I'm paring back, and it was pretty nice to kind of, cut this service. So I don't need this. We'll cut this one off. You do this all the time. Well, I don't need this service. I just kind of did an inventory of everything I'd been paying monthly payments to. And now that I'm using Auphonic, I don't think I'm going to use Audition anymore, because Audition was what I would use to.
That's me. It's on the chopping block for me. I'm like,
yeah, it's $20 a month.
I thought if I ever need to update a tutorial, maybe they come out with new features or something like that, I'll just buy it for a month, make my tutorials, and then, because I don't really use it a whole lot anymore.
No. And it's gotten expensive again. I mean, it's $21 a month or whatever for me now. Yeah. My thing ends in November. I'm going to cancel it for sure. And now that I'm just dropping things to Auphonic, it's a piece of cake.
See, that's the thing I need to check on, because you said you have to buy a year. I think I'm on a month-to-month thing, and
you can do month-to-month. You
Okay.
can't. It's more expensive. You get a deal. They give you a break if you buy an annual plan. You can still pay monthly, but you commit for a year.
See, that's it. Maybe I didn't know that I was committed.
Yeah. Well, don't be. This is you don't want to get married to Adobe. I mean, you can don't be committed there. Just do their month-to-month. I like yours. Buy it for the month if you need it. Rent it, basically.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper to rent it for a month than it is to own it for a year. So but I have fallen in love with Auphonic, and I just use the web version of it. And I buy the 11-hour plan, or 9 hours, which I think is $11, something like that.
So you're saving $9.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's just super. Yeah, no, right on.
They've got the thing where you can make little clamor thingies with the web-based version, right?
Oh, I haven't tried. I have to check it out. No, my workflow is I just drop it in and then go back to writing show notes, and it uploads and it'll email me when it's done. And I mean, it's great. And I've gotten really good sounding. I've had some guests that have been quiet.
Oh,
and man, that's a miracle. It is just a miracle.
I got somebody who called in on SpeakPipe, and I don't think it was their fault. And the first half of it was incredibly quiet. And then it got loud, but the loud part had tremendous amounts of hiss. And I dropped that bad boy into Auphonic, and I got done. I was like, "You are kidding! It sounds great, but it sounds a heck of a lot better. It's definitely listenable now."
Did it take the hiss out? Because they have that hiss eliminator.
I was surprised. So that's when I was like,
"It's just
the amount of time it would have taken me to pull that into Audition and play with different stuff."
I think it's the best paid. Well, for a podcaster, I think if you're going to pay for one thing, well, first you pay for hosting. So let's just take that off the table. You should always pay for hosting, but for those other services, I think Auphonic is or Levelator. I mean, either one of them, they work great.
Awesome.
I hadn't been doing that before, and I ran into a guest where it was really quiet, and I got negative audience feedback, and I was like, okay, I gotta fix this. Well, once I did Auphonic once, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, why wouldn't I just do this every time?
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right.
Good stuff. What are you doing this afternoon? You got anything?
I got to take my sister to some places, and then I have another concert tonight.
Oh, nice.
King's X at the Cleveland Agora.
King's X. They're still playing?
Yeah. I've never seen them. Never seen them. And I was like, I've been following you guys since, for those of you know, that's the people that do, if you like what you hear, go tell someone. That song is King's X.
Yeah, they've been around a long time.
Yeah, I found them in like 84.
Yeah.
They had a song on Headbangers Ball. And I've kind of followed them. If you wonder what I'm doing, I'm trying to pull the tab out of my t-shirt that's driving me crazy.
And they're a Christian band, right?
It's weird. They're not a quote Christian band. They're a band made up of Christians.
Yeah.
But
their music's pretty, I mean, their lyrics are appropriate and a lot of that
times.
stuff.
There are other times you're like, what is Doug singing about?
Oh, really?
He has some stuff. You're like, okay, he's very passionate about this, but I don't know. Yeah, Johnny Lang is also another guy that switched. He's got a lot of references to Invisible Sky Buddy. In fact, there are times it's interesting. See, now I'm going to go on a tangent.
Do it.
Because he was worried that he was going to lose his audience, but he was like, "Look, I've got to do some songs, and there's this one called Some Great Day, and it's like we will meet at the river, and it's like you could sing this in church,
overtly Christian, yeah,
and it's really
religious.
It's him and his voice and just a guitar. It's real kind of acoustic. He did that, and people were like, somebody screams out, "Can I get an amen?" And people are hollering and hooting. It's like, so he may have lost some people. Are like, he's too much of a Jesus guy for me now. But he probably gained a lot of people to fill their spot. So, and a lot of times it's just positive music. It's not like, yay, God. It's like he has one song called Turn Around that basically says no matter what your mistakes are, it's never too late to turn it around.
Yeah.
You know,
That's good positive.
Yeah.
Good positive. I had listened to some King's X back in the 80s, in the late 80s, and I'd gotten really into kind of the Christian music movement. And Steve Taylor. I don't know if you remember those from those days, Steve Taylor and anyways. So but I kind of thought they had dropped off. And then when you mentioned them, when I started listening to you and you mentioned, I'm like, they're still around.
Yeah,
and then for you to go to a concert, like they're still the guy. It's like Huey Lewis. The guy's like 100 years old.
Well, in both those concerts, I found out via Spotify. Wouldn't have known at all. I just happened to like, what is this concerts tab? And certain people I follow in Spotify, and they're like, these people are coming to your area. And I was like, you are kidding me. And that's when I found out if you buy a single ticket, you can get really good seats. So
yeah, Joe Taylor says, don't forget about Striper.
Striper.
Yeah.
I was a big Striper. I did not like. There was a band called the Res Band. I didn't like.
Oh
them.
yeah, the Res.
They sounded like it was recorded in a bad garage.
Mm-hmm. Greg Voles.
Yeah.
Greg Voles, who'd been the lead singer for Petra for a lot of years, and then he broke off on his own, and Petra got themselves a new. There's some from the 80s and early 90s. There's kind of a whole. Those poor guys. They were cutting. I mean, they were creating a brand new genre, and they were getting blasted by their own audience. The public sector, secular music, didn't care about them. They were like, whatever. And the church was just crushing them under, you're becoming too secular, And
Michael Sweet's book, the lead singer from Striper, is a good read. And he explains how Jimmy Swaggart, who was basically the guy that kind of led him to God, was just like every week, they're the devil's music, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I'm like, Jimmy, but I'm just we're on the same team, man. It's like, yeah, they had death threats. They had all sorts of stuff.
Poor guys getting shot by their own, they're getting friendly fire every week. Here they're out there trying to create and give,
Get their message out. Yeah.
Get the message out and give students an alternative to rock and roll, which doesn't always have the best lyrics, and those kinds of things. And then the church just guns them down, just shoot them down. And I'm glad they survived. There's some good music that came out of that era. Ryan mentions DC Talk, which of course probably the most, I think, if we think of all of them, DC Talk probably is the most influential and the most successful when we think of breaking out different genres and making it work. I mean, they were across the chart good in all they did, including rap and ballads and rock, and and yet they're still having an amazing. Those three guys, well, two of the three, are still having an amazing influence in the space.
Yeah.
So it's some good stuff. Yeah. Yeah, Michael Sweet is probably he's the third, I think, right? With that's or no, is that his? Anyway,
Michael Sweet, the guy, he's the lead singer from Striper.
Oh, right. I'm trying to think of the three from DC Talk. So Toby Mac, who's the black guy? Oh, they'll put it in the chat room. I should be able to just write off. I listened to those guys with my kids for years. That was the music we'd play in the car, and the kids loved it. But anyways, all right. Sorry, I kept you over. That's
all right.
Little what you call invisible sky buddy chat. Tate, yeah, Michael Tate. That's who it is, Michael Tate.
Oh, okay. Now I understand, because I'm not a big rap guy, but I remember the song Jesus Freak.
Yeah, well, so Toby Mac, Michael Tate, and there's another guy. What's interesting, so Toby Mac, the white guy, he's the rapper. Michael Tate, the black guy, he was the singer. And for a lot of years, people got those all mixed up because people made this assumption that only black people rap, and you're like, oh, okay, that's not really true. That's a little racist. Yeah. So that's not really true. And Toby Mac, I mean, if you want to talk about a guy with some talent,
yeah.
Toby Mac, man, he is just a hit machine, and that guy can do anything. He can do any kind of music, anyway. Super good stuff. He's just I really like his stuff.
Nice. They're having a Jesus Freak cruise this year.
Well, I don't know if I'd go on a cruise. I like it. I don't know if I like it that much.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know if I'd spend a cruise. First, my wife won't go on a cruise. She just thinks the idea of going on a boat is stupid.
I'm not a
So
huge
that's
fan.
never going to happen.
I've had to go on one. I've seen too many things where they tip over and drown and people get explosive diarrhea. And I'm like,
It's just too tight of a space. I'm not a big fan of
Yeah.
tight spaces to begin with. I would rather. We went down to Mexico, down to what's the place everybody goes to? My brain is totally fried. Cancun. There we go. So went down to Cancun. We actually stayed at a golf resort, which, in Cancun, there's the high-rise hotels and there's a million people and they jam them in. It's all inclusive, but there's just people everywhere. Well, in these golfing, the beaches weren't as good because they had put them in land that, they could use for golf courses. And the hotel rooms were spread out. The rooms were spread out in pods of 16, and you had to take a golf cart to get to your room. They weren't even close. So it was quiet. It was small, really small areas. That's my kind of vacation. Quiet, not a lot of people,
Right.
Lots of places to walk around.
Cool.
All right.
All right, peeps.
See you, man. Have a good weekend. Take care.
See ya.